How's it going, everyone? This is Mike, Gray 1951, and I'm back to do another video in my series of a movie for each year of my life. And this time I'm up to the year 1959. I was 8 years old, and I've been planning to do this for several weeks. And the reason why I didn't get to do it a little bit sooner is because about a week and a half ago, I shaved off my beard and my goatee and my mustache, just because I've had it so long and I wanted to see what I look like without it. Now I know. So I waited until it started to grow back again because I just feel better if I'm a little bit covered up. Besides, the gray is my trademark. Somebody on Facebook said that this is my trademark, so I have to get it back again. All right, so I'm doing a film from 1959 called Shadows, directed by John Cassavetes. The very first film that he directed, and this is a very low-budget film. I believe the final shooting budget was something like $12,500 or something like that. They shot it on 16mm film. It's a very crudely made film, has a lot of flaws, has very bad editing, because Cassavetes and his crew and his actors were all just starting out in the process of filmmaking. Cassavetes, of course, was an actor. He had been doing stage work and a lot of live television starting back in the late 1940s. He was building a very big reputation as an actor in live television. But he started out this filmmaking process in 1957, and he really didn't know what he was doing. He did many interviews in his career where he talked about how they were just doing it day by day, making mistake after mistake, but they just kept going until they finished. Now, Cassavetes, as I said, he was an actor, but he also had his own acting workshop in New York City, where his method for helping people learn how to act and learn their craft was basically improvisation, where he would give them an idea, a basic idea for a situation or a story, and then let the actors work with each other and start a conversation, start the drama, and then they would do it again and again and again, and expand on things until they had a script, they had a story that was coherent and could be written down. So in 1957, John Cassavetes started believing that he had enough material with some of these improvisational stories that they might have enough to make a film. And one of the reasons why he wanted to make a feature film as a director, he really didn't have any ambitions to be a director at the time. He was interested in acting and writing and his workshop, teaching. But when he started making films in the mid-1950s, he found the process very frustrating and very limiting as an actor, because in live television and of course on the stage, you have a beginning, a center, and an end. You get into your character and you just keep moving on, and the drama keeps building up to a conclusion. But in filmmaking, you don't always do things in order, in a linear fashion. And of course, you're always worried about what the camera is doing and staying in the proper place and getting the light corrected. He found the whole thing very frustrating. And so he thought that if he learned how to make a film, if he learned more about the process of filmmaking itself, it would help him as an actor. So that's one of the primary reasons why they started working on this thing called Shadows. Okay, so Shadows, the story, has to do with a group of people living in New York City who are all on the fringes of the arts. People who are trying to write, trying to paint, people who are musicians but not necessarily being very successful. And they're kind of, a lot of them are on the edges of the beat movement of the time, the beatnik movement. And the kind of people who either organize or attend literary parties, people who go to parties just to talk about books. Okay, so it's that kind of atmosphere. And within this group of people, the centerpiece is an African American family of 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. They are played by, one thing about Shadows, you have to realize that all the actors in the film use their own names as the characters. Okay, so the older brother in this family is a guy named Hugh Hurd. Okay, and he is a singer, or he thinks he is. He's been working at it for about 10 years. He appears to be in his mid-30s, and He's not terribly successful. He's not even terribly talented, but it's just something that he wants to keep doing. He's managed by his very good friend, another African-American man named Rupert Cross. And his younger brother and sister are played by Ben Carruthers, an actor who sometimes goes by the name of Benito Carruthers, and Lelia Goldoni. And she is the youngest in the family. And Hugh is a very dark-skinned black man, whereas his brother and sister are very light-skinned and can very easily pass for white, which is what they do in this film. And that's where the drama and the conflict generally come from. Ben and Lelia are sort of in the middle of the black world and the white world. And they happen to be involved in a group of people who have a very eclectic way of living. The parties they attend are attended by people of both races. Everybody seems to interact and get along very well. People of different races are dancing with each other, they're flirting with each other. And you have to remember that even though this is New York City and probably a little more progressive, this is 1959 America, okay, racist America. So a lot of the things they're showing in this film are very, very much ahead of their time, very innovative. But Lelia and Ben seem to have, they just seem to pass for white very naturally. In Lilia's case, it doesn't seem to be a premeditated thing. She's just herself, and people accept her as white. And in the course of the film, she meets a young white man at a party, played by Anthony Ray, who happens to be the son of director Nicholas Ray. And he's immediately attracted to her. She feels the same way. They get close very quickly, and on their first day together, she ends up sleeping with him. And she is a virgin. This is the first time she's ever had a sexual experience. And when he meets her family, he finds out that she's African American or mixed race or something that is never actually explained in the film. But he rejects her. Okay? And as far as Ben goes, he seems to be more premeditated about passing for white. And most of the friends that he's very close to, they're all white men. They all go out and they look for white women. And he seems to have a real conflict about who he is. Now keep in mind that these three siblings live together. They're very close. They're just like any normal family. They argue, they fight. Hugh is very protective of his brother and sister and tries to kind of, especially his sister, trying to guide them along without being overbearing. So that is the central force of what the film is about. And when it has these conflicts that have to do with race, the way Cassavetes presents it in the film is without having these long expository speeches where people talk about these things. Rather, you get the impression that these people have talked about these things many, many times, and they're at a stage in their life where they're just living. The conflicts are there, and you understand what they're feeling about each other just by the looks on their faces, the way they approach each other, without having a lot of conversation about it. It's really extremely well done. And another very innovative scene is where Lelia and Tony, they're in his apartment, and of course it's not sexually graphic at all, but it does show them during the seduction part of the event, and then being in bed afterward, and just kind of the aftermath and talking about it. And the way the woman reacts to what has happened to her, what she's done, is not what you would imagine in typical Hollywood 1950s film, where they're immediately in love and everything's wonderful. In fact, she talks about how disappointed she is. And of course, the typical man says, "It'll be a lot easier the next time." And her response is, "There's not going to be a next time. I didn't know it could be so awful." So you don't expect to hear something like that from a woman in American films of 1959. It was very, very much ahead of its time. So that's the drama of the film. Shadows is, I think I said that in the beginning, it's a very crudely made film. It has a lot of flaws in it, Of course, it's in black and white. It has kind of a grainy look to it because they were doing it very cheaply and very trying to do it sort of haphazardly, you know, as they would get a little more money, then they would shoot a little more, then they would wait until they got some more money, and then they would keep working on it, and made a lot of mistakes. Cassavetes said at the time that he would never get involved in this kind of filmmaking again. Well, of course, he did become a director. He began to love directing, and he wanted to do it and do it better. So he was always trying to perfect his method of directing. But the film had an interesting history in that it was first released in 1957. And I'm getting a lot of my information about this film out of this wonderful book called Accidental Genius: How John Cassavetes Invented the American Independent Film, written by a guy named Marshall Fine. And I'm getting a lot of my information, and his information is different than a lot of other things I've read in different places. Now, there was an original version of Shadows that was released sometime either in late 1957 or very early 1958. When Cassavetes had it finished, he arranged at a theater in New York to show it 3 performances all at midnight. Okay, so it was one of the original midnight movies, I guess. I don't know. So there weren't a lot of people at the time who saw it, but those who did, it gave it kind of a mixed reaction. There were some people who thought it was brilliant and the wave of the future. Some people were completely perplexed by it and walked out of the film, and some people thought it was a mess. Cassavetes himself, when he saw it on the big screen, he wasn't happy. So he pulled the film from release and eventually decided to do some more work on it. And when he got around to deciding to do more work on it, it was almost a year or so later, and a lot of the actors had moved on. He had to call them back. They agreed to come back. So he did re-editing. He made a lot of changes. He made the relationship between Lelia and Tony the focal point of the film, whereas in the beginning it had not been. So a lot of things were changed. And then he released the second version in 1959, so which is why that's the year that I usually see recorded as the year of release, which is why I'm doing this as my film for that year. So it got more attention. It still had a very limited release. It wasn't until 1960 when it was chosen for a film festival in the United Kingdom, and that's when it started to get more attention, and it was eventually picked up by a British film company for distribution in the United Kingdom and I guess other parts of Europe, and eventually in 1961 that same British company released it in the United States. So it never was a big moneymaker, but it did get more attention, and Cassavetes himself got more attention as a director. What it did for him was enable him to get a deal made at a major Hollywood studio, Paramount Studios, to make any film that he wanted, and he was given a budget of pretty big for its time, $350,000. So he ended up making two films for studios. One was called Too Late Blues in 1961 at Paramount, and then he made, in the following year, he made a film called A Child Is Waiting at United Artists, both of which were not successful, both of which were very frustrating experiences for him because he had other people telling him what to do and when to do it and who he had to have in the film. So after that, he vowed that he would never do anything except make his own movies with his own money, with the people that he chose, and that's what he did for the rest of his career. So Shadows was, I would recommend that everybody who's interested in the history of cinema to see this at least once. In fact, I would recommend that you go out and get this entire box set from the Criterion Collection, John Cassavetes' 5 films, which this is part of. I think that it's well, I guess in a way Cassavetes is an acquired taste, but he's somebody that I'm really a big fan of. And I'd like to read you one little quote from this book about Shadows, which can kind of tell you, in Marshall Fine's words, much better than me, the impact that Shadows had. Quote, "If you watched Shadows with contemporary eyes, with no context other than the fact that it was a film from the late 1950s, you might be entertained, but you would probably be otherwise unimpressed. If you watched knowing only that it was a landmark but not knowing why, you'd probably remain mystified, at least until the closing titles told you the film had been improvised. More about that in a few minutes. Yet in it can be seen the skeleton of what would become the independent film movement in America. Films made with the idea that a personal artistic expression could be achieved in movies, one that took chances and experimented with form, but was still recognizable as a film, with characters you cared about and paid attention to. Plot wasn't necessarily optional, but it was definitely not the first concern. Okay, so that's probably the best way that I can recommend Shadows to you by what this man has said. Now, the whole idea of improvisation, at the end of Shadows, the closing credits, there's a card that comes on that says, the film you have just watched was an improvisation, which led a lot of people to believe that everything that people were saying they were making up as they were going along, which was not true. As he did in his film classes, Cassavetes encouraged all of his actors to begin with improvisation, and as they perfected what they were doing, to have a coherent script. So that's exactly what happened with Shadows. There was a written script written by Cassavetes, but it was largely created out of what they had improvised in their classes in preparing to make the film. So that kind of explains. But he was looked upon for the rest of his career as being an actor who encouraged a director who encouraged his actors to just improvise entire films, and that simply wasn't the case. Now, there is sort of an aftermath to Shadows, and that is whatever happened to the original film, the one that Cassavetes didn't like, and the one that a few people saw and thought was brilliant. Okay, well, there was a Cassavetes historian and educator named Ray Carney, who wrote several books about Cassavetes in the 1980s and interviewed him many times and got to know him pretty well. And he was kind of obsessed with finding the original version of Shadows. And Cassavetes himself had no idea what had happened to it. I guess there were only a few copies that were made of it. They didn't have a lot of money to make a lot of copies. And he said that he had given the copy that he had given it away to some film students so they could practice editing. So he had no idea what happened to it. Well, Cassavetes died in 1989, and Ray Carney started this search before Cassavetes died. It took him 17 years and almost $40,000 of his own money to track down the original version of Shadows. Just clue after clue, asking people, going from place to place, and he actually found it in somebody's attic somewhere in Florida. He found an entire 60mm film in some enclosed box or container that people didn't even know what they had. But he found this film, and before he even watched it, he waited 10 days to have it transferred to videotape so that he could preserve the film and then watch it. And he found that he had a pristine version of the entire, what he is pretty sure was the entire original version of Shadows, which is very, very different than the one that we have now. And so he was so excited about getting this. He felt like he had found a holy grail. And he started showing it in some of his film classes, and he started offering it to film festivals. And there was a film festival in Europe that was going to show this. And when Cassavetes' widow, Jenna Rollins, the actress, found out about it, and her lawyers, they were outraged that anybody would show a film of her husband's without their permission, because she has control over Cassavetes' property and his name. So they sued the guy to stop him from showing it. Well, which put him and the film festival in a bad position, because they had already planned to show it. And so they made a compromise at the time that they would allow it to be showed that one time, but with a disclaimer that it was being shown without permission, and that the man who had this film in his possession really had no right to have it. And Jenna Rollins has asked this man on many occasions to surrender this film to her because she feels that it should not be shown. It was not the film that John Cassavetes wanted to be shown. It was considered to be unfinished. And she feels that it is somehow harmful to his legacy to show this film. Well, from what I think it stands now that Ray Carney has not surrendered this film, and they are still kind of going at it He has a website that I've been to many times. Haven't been there for a while, so I'm not sure where this all stands now. But Jenna Rollins has gone so far as to say that if she ever gets her hands on the original version of Shadows, she will probably destroy it to prevent it from being seen, which to me is kind of an overreaction, but you know, what can you do? It's her husband. She's very passionate about it. But anyway, this version is readily available, and I recommend that everybody would see it at least once. So now I'll shut up. So if any of you have seen Shadows and you have any comments about it, or you have any questions, comments are always welcome. So thank you very much, and I will see you again for 1960.